again, by sheer accident, not planning, mind you, you have 3 candidates, all of whom are running as conservatives on economic and public safety and immigration issues, and as moderates on social and cultural and environmental issues. Now, that does not necessarily reflect the broader ideological base of the Republican Party. But when Republicans win statewide races in California, it's by running candidates like Schwarzenegger and before him like Wilson, who tend to fit that ideological mold. Normally, as we did in 2002 when Dick Reardon ran and Bill Simon beat him in the primary, normally we'd see a more traditional social conservative getting in this race and going to the base of the party and saying you can't trust Whitman or Campbell or Poizner because they're squish moderates. But because Poizner and Whitman have so much money available to them, I don't think you see a traditional social conservative get in the race, which means that Republicans will almost certainly have an economic conservative social moderate running. On the Democratic side, the most important thing, and I know that had nothing to do with your question, but I want to, the most interesting thing on the Democratic side is generation. When Mayor Vito Ragosa made what I think was for him a very, very smart decision not to run for governor, the common supposition was that would help former governor, current Attorney General Brown, because Brown is positioned for any number of reasons, is better positioned to reach out to the Hispanic American and labor constituencies that would have formed the base of Vito Ragosa's support. What Newsom's people argue, and there's some validity to this, although we'll see as the campaign unfolds, is that the Democratic primary between Brown and Newsom is good for Newsom. And then it frames that generational question that you brought up in very stark way. He's not one of 2 younger candidates running against the 70-something-year-old Attorney General. It's a 40-something versus a 70-something candidate. And their hope, if Newsom is going to win this primary in the governor's office, it's going to be by convincing Democratic primary voters that a candidate who is more familiar to them, not just in terms of name recognition, but in terms of ideology and policy agenda, is not as well prepared to deal with the challenges of this new century. The real risk for Newsom is his campaign is trying to duplicate the excitement that the Obama campaign was able to develop among young voters. And I think what's worth remembering, for all the talk about Twitter and Facebook and other forms of technology that people of our generation are only slowly becoming familiar with. By the way, the easiest way to peg yourself on a college campus as being too old to matter is referring to anything online based as new media. It is only new to us. So. I think it's worth remembering, though, that all of these techniques, while very valuable in carrying a message, they're a mechanism. They're the medium, not the message. Phil Angelides on the internet is still Phil Angelides. Fred Thompson, if you remember, ran for president last year. Fred Thompson on the internet is still dial-up. You need a core of a message to carry to the voters, and otherwise all the technology in the world is not going to help you. And I think while Newsom's campaign is wise to frame this race in such stark generational terms, the medium itself isn't enough to frame it that way. But again, coming back to your question, the most interesting thing in the governor's race to me is, can Gavin Newsom harness not the same kind of energy that Barack Obama did, because he can't. That was like people getting upset that Hillary Clinton wasn't as effective a communicator as Bill Clinton. That's not a fair standard to hold her to. Mayor Newsom is not going to establish the same kind of online presence and enthusiasm among youth voters as Barack Obama did. But if you can harness even a portion of it, that becomes the most important ingredient in next year's governor's race. That said, I think it is an uphill fight for him because, as we talked about earlier, state government just isn't as interesting or as exciting as national government is a presidential election. When you're electing somebody president, whether you wanted Barack Obama or Hillary Clinton or John McCain or anyone else, you are electing leader of the free world, and that is an inherently exciting thing. Electing a governor, even one who blows up buildings and fights bad guys, just isn't as exciting. And getting more casual participants in the process that revved up is a lot more difficult. Not to say Newsom can't do it, but if he does, and back to this gentleman, if Newsom does, he will do it.
We take 1 or 2 more questions. Or not?
Clearly, it's a limited submission. I'd say this just to wrap up. Just to wrap up then, is to go back to where we started. Is make no mistake about it. The state of California is in dire straits right now. We were joking earlier, Kathy and Bob and I, before the program started. I was talking about the potential in the future for additional federal support for California. And there's all sorts of reasons that we won't have time to get into today on why that's not likely to happen. And either Kathy or Bob, and I should credit whoever of you came up with it, suggested that we ask the federal government to start a cash for clunky states program. But we are in a difficult situation, the state is. But I want to go back to what I said before. We have been here before. And one of the really remarkable things to me about California, and it's what brought me here 19 years ago, is that there are a great number of cliches. The thing about truisms is that they often happen to be true. Is that the kind of person who comes from the East Coast or the Midwest or the Great Plains states to California is somebody by definition who's looking for something fundamentally better. If you're not, then you stay in Whitefish Bay, Wisconsin, or Rehoboth, Massachusetts, or Galveston, Texas, or wherever you came from. You come west because you think there's something better here. And that's been the basis of California's collective character since before the state was founded. And so even during my relative's short time in the state, watching 3 serious recessions that have taken place over the last 19 and a half years, 3 serious recessions in which, as I referenced earlier, the state of California was proclaimed dead and gone by the national media. We found our way back out of it, and we will again. So there is cause for concern. There is cause even for occasional moments of despair. But knowing that the people of this state come here or stay here because they are confident in their abilities, individually and collectively, and because they are optimistic that bad situations can be made worse, to me is great solace. We have done it before. We can do it again. But in order to dig out of this hole, which is arguably deeper than any of those we've seen over the last couple of decades, it really does require a heightened level of pressure and accountability from us toward the people we elect to represent our interests in the state in the state capital. As I said earlier, 38 million people can't organize politically. 38 million people won't. 38 million people don't pay attention to this stuff. So when we talk about civic engagement, we're not talking about every man, woman, and child in the state of California. We're talking about those relatively unique individuals who really care deeply enough about the state and about their communities to show up at the California Endowment at 8:30 in the morning in a tiny little room like this one to listen to the likes of me. So I'd suggest to you that if we are going to get out of this, not just for the gentleman in the back who's thinking about running for office, but if the state of California is going to recover, if its elected officials are going to become more responsive, they're not going to become responsive to their entire communities. They're going to become responsible to people like the people in this room. So thank you for coming. Thank you for what I suspect has already been an unusually high level of community involvement. And the last thing I'll say is do even more, because we need it. Thanks very much.